Hello everyone, welcome back. I'm Simon Walker from Maxon, Director of Training, and we're delighted to welcome back Lionel Vicidomini. Hi Lionel.
Hello.
Hi there. We're looking at today the second in the series of these sessions using Redshift, I should say. Sorry, force of habit. Redshift and After Effects as well as Cinema 4D. And here's the PDF that you may have linked to, or it may have been the email version that you booked the sessions for. And this is what we're doing today. It's very exciting because Lionel's got some amazing techniques for coming out of cinema and then compositing using 32-bit linear workflow inside After Effects with some nice little tools that make the whole process a bit easier. So some of these are essential workflows for working with 32-bit. And this is Lionel's take on things, and I think it's really excellent. So we are recording this session. We will share the link to the recording automatically via email. The link's actually here on this PDF, and the PDF's in the chat window. So if you need another link to it, please also feel free to reach out to us. training@maxon.net, which is at the bottom of the PDF, as usual for all these sessions. And by the way, just in case you haven't seen it, this link for the recordings, it links to a specific set of recordings on a YouTube channel. So we created a Maxon volume training channel with all the recordings that we've made this year for these technical sessions. So we've got all the ones that were by Jonas and Darren, and also some of Lionel's previous sessions. And also this is the one from yesterday, creating a model. So this is a continuation on that one. Great. So we've got so much stuff to get to. I'm going to hand over to you, Lionel. And let's make you the presenter. Great. So as ever, please feel free to ask questions as we move along. Darren is helping us out with questions. And also, if you've got any comments or whatever, please type those in and we'll endeavor to answer all your questions either via the questions panel or I'll ask Lionel during the session. Great, so over to you, Lionel.
Yeah, thank you, Simon. So welcome everyone. And we're going to see today how to composite our Redshift scene created yesterday, which is a simple domino scene. So let me show you the final rendering. So this is the final composited rendering. Very simple scene made for that purpose, where we have tumbling dominos. So yesterday we saw how to create that in Cinema 4D, texture, light, and so on. And today we're going to see how to composite, add the motion blur, add the depth of field, how to color correct, and so on, with After Effects using 32-bit linear workflow. So why are we going to use 32-bit linear workflow? Because that will give us more liberty to change the lighting, to change the color, to have a more filmic response to everything, and to add motion blur, to add depth of field very easily, and to change the color of one domino or two domino or any domino we want very easily. It's a bit technical. It's more work because you have to set up your AOV in Redshift, know how to do it, but that gives you the liberty to change anything, almost anything you want after the rendering, instead of waiting for another day of rendering and the computer being blocked because of that. So let me present you before the scene in Cinema 4D. For those who were in here yesterday, it's a very, very simple scene. I kept it simple for that purpose. It's only dominos tumbling down. It's animated with MoGraph, so I didn't use the physics. And the lighting and the texturing of the scene is extremely simple too. So we have only 3 materials, one for the ground, one for the domino. And the carving on the dominoes are distributed with a few Redshift tricks, and the lighting is just one simple dome light. So it's extremely simple. And if I can show you the rendering using the IPR in the viewport, we can see we have that scene. And as you can notice, it doesn't look at all like the one I showed you in the rendered movie. The highlights here are just blown out. The lighting is a bit too contrasty. The colors, everything is not as interesting as the movie. And that's normal because we're going to change all that in compositing using the exact same rendering. Okay. Let me just show you in After Effects the same file. You see after. And if I just deactivate all the retouching, we can see here our raw render. And this is the render with everything on it. And to show you that we can do anything we want, if I click here, I'm going to have dominos of another color, and everything is animated. Following along with some great stuff as, for example, if I want to change the depth of field, I want to have the depth of field not on that first domino, but rather on the back. I just need to change that. Okay, no re-rendering needed. So that's one of the main advantage of taking the pain of setting everything up. Okay, so let's jump to Cinema 4D and see with Redshift how to set up our AOV to be able to do that compositing. And just before that, before adding any AOV, because I don't have anyone in the scene right now, I just want to show you on the render view postfix and what's the idea behind postfix. So if I launch the render, the Redshift with our render view. So to have postfix, you need to use the render view. We have our render, and I need to do a few stuff. Yes, and that's the raw render, as we saw earlier. And what's postfix? Postfix is a kind of, well, postfix. So to do some compositing work, color correction work after the rendering. The idea being that you can do all together at the same time. So I can change the scene, I can change my light, I can change my material. It's being rendered in real time, and I can do all the color correction here at the same time and see how it looks. But postfix is really meant to do, is only to be used for look dev. Look dev, that's it. That means for checking your color, searching for the mood of the scene, seeing how the colors are reacting and so on. So it's not intended to be used as the final rendering. You can do it, obviously, but if you want to do compositing work, you will need to turn it off. So the first step is to create your scene, have the right lighting, the right texture, and so on. And then you're going to look for the look of the scene with those tools, then deactivate that look, and you're going to recreate it even better in After Effects or Fusion or Nuke. So here I'm going to use After Effects. That's really the idea behind everything. So here I still have my rendering, and we'll see in postfix. You can access this by clicking on the gear we have here, and we're going to see a few stuff. So what I do usually, at first I'm looking for the light, the texture, and so on, and pretty quickly I'm going to use a little bit of those functions to see how everything is behaving. So first, I'm usually using in the LUT here one special option. So in the LUT, I'm using here in the LUT location, so Redshift is shipped with a lot of LUT. So LUT is lookup table. It's filmic response for the color. And I'm using those LUTs in the filmic LUTs. So I'm not using those ones which are very well known. We have the color response of film grading and so on. I don't like to use those because they are barely just contrast curve. I'm using the filmic LUT, which are quite different. And I'm going to use the filmic high contrast. Open it. And by default, it's going to look like that. So it looks like garbage, and that can scare a lot of people, but you just need here to check this button, convert to log space before applying LUT, okay? And when you do that, you're going to get a much better result. So just look at the highlight we have here. If I check, uncheck, before, after, okay? So the filmic look is going to mimic the filmic response of real film. And that means we don't have so many blonde highlights. We have more interesting contrast. We have desaturation on the color because of the contrast and so on. So we have a more interesting result. And you can switch here from different look. You can use a filmic base contrast, for example, which is a bit blend, a bit flat, and use maybe the filmic very high contrast, which has even more contrast. And usually I use this one, the high contrast. I find it to be a good middle ground. Then you can use all the other tool, the color control. So the color control is just going to give you the same curve, exposition tool, and so on as you would have in After Effects. So here I can just add a few highlights and just compress a little bit the shadows. The photographic exposure tool, I don't use it because I prefer to use that one a lot, so I won't show it. But it's meant to function almost as the same as this LUT, but I think it's less efficient. And here is the bloom to add some blooming effect. So the bloom effect is a kind of glow. So if I just tint it to very bright color, we'll see it. You can see the color creeping in. If I increase now the bloom intensity, you can see it here. Decrease the bloom threshold to have something overwhelming. And you can see we still have a bit of the very high highlight here. So this is the bloom. I can use, instead of the bloom, I can use the streak. The streak is the same as the bloom, but it makes streaks. So those star shape we can have here. And we can have different, we can alter the direction and so on to have that very, very strong like that. And already it looks a lot better than the raw render we have when I don't use Postifix. Okay. But as good as it looks, it's nearly not as good as what you could achieve with the proper compositing in After Effects, Nuke, or Fusion. So usually I'm just looking for that kind of stuff to see how everything works. And then I'm going to deactivate everything. So I deactivate Postifix and apply to file output. And I'm going to set up my AOV to create the compositing. So just one quick note, because I anticipate some question. You can absolutely just use like that, everything like that. Use it as a raw render. You're just going to go in After Effects, maybe add a vignette or whatever, and use it as it is. There's no problem with that. The problem is if you have a client, he just doesn't like those highlights, you are stuck. You are stuck with it. You can't change it. And if you have spent 8 hours rendering this image, you won't be able to reduce that unless you're going to make a mess of your image. So we'll have to render again 8 hours. Then we'll have another change, another request. Then we have to render again. So it's better to have something that you can do after the rendering in After Effects. That's really the main purpose. So I'm going to deactivate those. And now we're going to see how to set up the AOV to recreate our compositing inside After Effects, separating the reflection, the specular, and so on and so on. So I'll just stop it here. Okay, so the AOV in Redshift, they are here. It's only the multipass. So in other render engine, they use it render pass. In Redshift and Arnold also, it's called AOV for arbitrary output value because it's so powerful that it can output almost anything you want. In the Redshift AOV manager, we have that huge list of AOV. It's a bit overwhelming. It's even scary because what the heck I'm going to use among all that. So that requires a bit of knowledge. You have to study the documentation and to have done a bit of compositing to know what to use. So I will show you a very simple compositing using only a few of those passes and how to exploit them in After Effects. So let's start. The very basic compositing requires just a few passes. So the diffuse lighting, which is only the lighting of the scene without the reflection, without the specular, without the transparency, and so on. Only the lighting of the scene. Then you will use usually the GI, so the GI which is there, global illumination, if you are using GI in the scene. So I'm using GI in the scene because in Redshift here I have set up my GI. Very simple GI because it's not open, it's not a closed scene, it's an open scene. So the GI is not very important, but it's still useful to have a bit of it. You will see it in the render pass. So this is a GI. And I will need the reflection. So the reflection are the reflection of each object altogether. So if one object is going to be reflected in another object, it's in the reflection. And the specular lighting is actually all the reflection of the light. So it's very important because in this scene, all my lighting is done by the dome light using HDRI. Okay, so all the reflection of that light is going to be in the specular and the rest will be in the reflection. Okay, and that's it. We have everything to do the most basic compositing. Because I don't have any refraction, the reflection will be for all glass material. I don't have any volume, so fog, smoke, and that kind of stuff. I don't have any SSS, subsurface scatter, which are on all the marble, ketchup, milk material, and so on and so on. Obviously, I would use them if I had that kind of material in the scene. I don't have any emission material, so if I had a TV or a lamp, a light that I can see in the scene, I would use the emission. So for this simple scene, I just need those 4 passes. And we're going to take a look just in the render views, how it looks. So if I go in the render view, fire up everything, it's going to be shown there. So this is the beauty. The beauty is the final compositing inside Redshift. And we can see the diffuse lighting. So the diffuse lighting is very flat, as you can see. There is no reflection, only the lighting of the scene. The GI, where we can see the GI is all the bounced light. So the dominoes being white are going to give a lot of GI light, and the ground not so much because it's darker. It makes sense. The white object are going to bounce more light than the darker object. And you can see here at the base of our dominoes a bit of the ground because it's lit by the light bounced off from the dominoes. So the AOV also are great to just troubleshoot your scene, to see what's doing what, to see where are exactly the reflection, what exactly does the GI. Then we have the reflection. So this is the reflection of the dominoes on the ground. That explained because we don't see anything on the back because there are no dominoes, and the reflection of the ground on the dominoes. So the object altogether. And specular lighting, which is only the HDRI, the lighting, on every object in the scene. And altogether makes up the beauty. Okay, so that's the very basic stuff. I won't do rendering in the first session. I did a rendering of that, but it takes a bit of time, so I will skip that. I'm going to create directly the rendering of our the setup of the complete scene. So let's go.
Do you want to mention AO at any point, Lionel? How you might approach that?
I'm going to do that right now, actually, because I'm going to use more AOV. So I just wanted to show that we can use only those, but I'm going to add more stuff to have a more complete. And then in After Effects, I will show everything, including.
Fantastic. Great. We just had a couple of questions on it, that's all, but I knew you had it covered.
Yes. So okay, so what am I going to add to this scene? So, well, let's talk about the AO because that's one of the thing I want to add. So just one thing to note about the AO, more and more I don't use AO anymore. AO is the trick of rendering. It's a trick to create contact shadow between the object. But it's really a trick because it's only doing it by calculating the normals of the object close together, okay? And that's very important because it creates contact shadow and makes the scene more realistic. But with modern render engine, we have naturally contact shadow because of the GI, because of the lighting, which are realistic. And it's before you always had to use the ambient occlusion pass, but now it's something I use sometimes. Usually I just calculate the AO pass, but very often I don't use it at the end. But it's still interesting to have it. So let's do that. And the first trick, I would even say a trap, is that ambient occlusion is not the right ambient occlusion. So don't use it because it's not going to work, even though it's called AO ambient occlusion. It's a deprecated node. It's only there for compatibility with older scene. Don't use it. It's really a trap. And you are going to use instead a custom AOV. So the custom AOV is a AOV you can use with to output almost anything. That's why AOV are called arbitrary output value, because you can output anything you want with that. So I'm going to use the custom AOV, and the custom AOV, I'm going to call it AO, ambient occlusion. It's going to need a default material. Okay, so we're going to create that material to be used with the AO by going there, create Redshift utilities AO. Okay, and this material is a very simple material because if I launch the edit graph shader graph, we only have that node connected to the output, and that's all. And if I just drag and drop that material to the default material, I have my AO pass. That's as simple as that, but you have to create it yourself. And we'll see how it looks with the rendering later. So that's taken care of for the AO. So now let's see more paths. So as I was telling you, the diffuse lighting is the lighting of the scene. But I want to go a bit further inside After Effects by separating the color of the scene, the color of the material, from the shadow and the shading of the scene. And that's exactly what we're going to do using the diffuse filter and the diffuse lighting row. Those two paths together recreate the diffuse lighting. So actually, I wouldn't even need to use the diffuse lighting. Okay, I could just trash it because those two are enough to recreate the diffuse lighting. You will see what's interesting with that. So I'm going to put them on top. And actually, I could do the same with the reflection filter, reflection row, with the GI global illumination row, and so on, to have a lot of control on your scene. But a lot of control means also a lot of stuff to put together. So I only use this one because I find it very useful. You'll see. Then I need to output some paths for the depth of field. So that's very easy because it's called depth. Here it is. This path need a bit of setup. So this is the Z path. It's going to output a black and white image for the depth of the scene. So the blackest objects are close from the camera and the whitest are going to be afar. You need to change your filter type from full to center sample or min depth, max depth. Actually, it's not going to inter-alias the Z path because it's going to create artifact if you have a full filtering. So I just use a center sample. Depth mode Z, that's fine. And by default, it's using the use camera near far. So that's something important to see. In my scene, I have my camera. And if you go to the detail, you will see here, we have a near clipping, far clipping activated. So what does it mean? I can show you with the near clipping. If I use it, increase, at some point, you can see we're clipping the scene. Okay, it's not going to render that, just going to ignore everything behind that plane. So I don't want that, but I'm just going to use it as a starting point for our Z path. And actually I can put it at 0 centimeter. And for the far clipping, same thing you see here. So here I'm just going to give a little bit of room, going, for example, 105,000, 1,500 centimeter. Okay, so it works during the whole animation. Nothing is clipped, and those values are going to be used by our camera near far. The other way is just to deactivate that and use those values, but those values are not going to move with the camera, you see. So you will have to change your white point on After Effects using the camera near far. It's going to move with the camera, so the focus point won't change. Okay, so that's being taken care of, the Z path. We're going to output the motion vector. The motion vector is for motion blur. And the good news is this one, you don't need to change anything because it's going to work right out of the render engine. Maybe the only thing you might change is the max motion. If you have a very fast moving scene, you might decrease or increase if you have a very slow scene. this value. But all the other, you just keep it this way, except for the filtering. As the Z pass, the motion vector pass works better without filtering. And we are almost done. Now I would like to add just the shadow pass. The shadow pass is going to be used with our diffuse lighting and so on. The shadow pass will allow us to erase the shadow of the scene without touching anything else, or increase the shadow, as you will see. And we are done, except for the Cryptomatte. So the Cryptomatte is one of the many ways to output some mate, so to isolate object in the scene. There are several ways to do that, the object ID, the puzzle mate, but the Cryptomatte is really the bomb because it replaced all the other. It's so much capable. It's a bit peculiar to use. You just use the Cryptomatte here. And the Cryptomatte is going to output a mate for every object in the scene by default, because it's based here on the object name. Okay, but you can change it to, for example, material name. So it's going to output the object based on the material, or object ID. So those are object ID you're going to set up yourself using the Redshift object ID. And user attribute is even another way to select which object you want to have. The object name is the brute force, I would say, approach, because it's going to give a mate for everything in the scene. Be careful with that, because if you use the object name with a huge scene with thousands of objects, you're going to have a humongous Cryptomatte file. That's not a good idea. But here, because my scene is so simple, I can use it straight as it is. The Cryptomatte is special because it doesn't work with the multipass. So more on that later. I'm going to talk about that. It's going to create a direct rendering. Otherwise, it won't work. So it's going to output one extra EXR file. Okay, you have to know about that. All the others here are going to be contained inside one single file, EXR. Okay, so I think I have everything. We're just going to take a look in the Redshift render view, how it looks. And we can see all our render paths here. So the AO path, which looks like ambient occlusion path, and we're going to tweak it a little bit because that's not really good. The AO path, Cryptomatte, you won't see anything. Don't worry, that's normal. The depth path, you won't see anything either because all the pixels are kind of hidden. It's something we will see in After Effects. And even in After Effects, we will need to use a few tricks to see it. But trust me, it's going to work. But very often the AOV looks like that. It doesn't look like anything, but you just know it's going to work. Diffuse filter, so this one works, and you can see already the interest. It's only the color information, no shading, no reflection, no shadow, nothing. So it would be very easy to tweak the colors of that without touching the contrast of the scene. The diffuse lighting we already saw. Diffuse lighting raw, to be used with our diffuse filter, is going to give us only the shading of the scene. So by combining the lighting raw and the filter, we'll have complete control over the contrast and the color of the scene. The GI, motion vector, you won't see it in the render view. Just have to know about that. Reflection didn't change. The shadow doesn't look like much, but you will see how we're going to use it. And specular lighting, which hasn't changed. So everything is fine. I'm going to stop the rendering. I'm actually not going to render anything of that because it's pretty fast. It's 5 minutes, but we have only 1 hour to see everything. So I have pre-render all that in a OpenEXR sequence. We will see just before the setup in the save path. So in the save path, and you need to be precise here. You actually don't need the regular image. That sounds very strange, but the regular image is going to be inside the multipass image. So you can have an image if you want, but it's not necessary. So I don't use it. In the multipass image, I'm going to use save here, and you have to be very careful with the settings. You're going to need open EXR, nothing else. Okay, it won't work with any other format for a number of reasons. Open EXR, the depth must be, well, actually it can be 16-bit. It's going to work, but you will have less dynamic range. 32-bit channel is the best, I think, because that way you're going to you can treat those very high highlights you can have in your scene. Multi-layer file is very important also because that way all the AOV, all that is going to be contained inside one EXR sequence. So that's comfortable because you don't have to deal with 100 of files everywhere. Everything is inside here. And layer name as suffix, as every one of your AOV is going to be named by the name you have here. Okay, so it will be clearer. One quick note about the compression of the format. OpenEXR is a complicated format because it can do a lot of things. Actually, you can use it for video, you can use it for still image, and so on. And I use the compression method PXR24, which is a lossy compression, but actually you won't see the loss. It's like a very, very, very good JPEG. It's even better than that. And it's going to be less big than the default, which is I think the zip file. But you can see all those compression, and we have a PDF file for you to look at in the chat. It's a PDF file created by a friend of mine, Nicolas Dufresne, which is a French motion designer, animator, programmer, which has he has written that guide, which is very, very useful. And here we are. So everything set up. So remember, OpenEXR 32 bits per channel, multi-layer file. You don't need the regular image. And now I can launch my rendering. And let's jump to After Effects to see how to manage all that. So maybe there are some questions because I'm talking and talking.
The one of the questions we came up, Rob was asking about the order of the AOVs and was that important? Do you have to do it in a certain process?
Well, no, yes and no, because there are many AOV. Like I told you, this is still a pretty simple setup. It can be a lot more confusing. And I like for myself to have that order, okay? But it can be any order you want. This is the order you will have in After Effects. So it's interesting to have something that makes sense. So I just, those four are going to take care of all the lighting. Those three are going to finalize the lighting, and all those are just technical paths. So I just put them on the bottom, but it's going to work just the same if I just change that. In After Effects, it's another matter because you have to have a certain order, but it's pretty loose.
Great, thank you.
So let's go to After Effects, and I'm going to recreate everything. So you can see we have already our passes. I can just show you the GI, specular, the AO, and so on. Oh yes, I didn't talk about that, the AO. Just go back to the AO. Like I told you in After Effects, in Redshift, when I was showing the AO, this AO here doesn't make any sense, I think, because it's an open scene with white dominos, very bright. So it doesn't make any sense to have some gray values, to have some shadows on the dominos, on the whole dominos. It's okay to have that on the ground, it makes sense, but you have some shading everywhere, it's not very logical. Don't ever forget that the ambient occlusion is not minding the light. It's just calculating the AO based on the position of the object and the normals of the object. So in the AO node, I just selected here and have the option here. We have several options here, and I like to just change the max distance. If I change the max distance, you will see how it works. It's going to limit the distance of the AO. That is more realistic to my sense, because in the open scene, very bright scene, there's going to be contact shadow, where on the contact shadow. So only on the ground here. It's not going to create contact shadow between the upright dominos. We will have some contact shadow if I advance the scene. So it's yes. And we have here some contact shadow when the dominos are touching together. So that's a good AO. The other one wasn't, just by touching here the max distance. Okay, so in After Effects, I'm going to start a new scene, new project. So I'm working with After Effects 2020, the very last version. It's very important because Adobe did a great work on that version for 32-bit compositing, because all the necessary plugins are already included. Before you had to download them somewhere else, and now they're included inside, and they are faster too. So if you had some difficulties using EXR with After Effects, I would really recommend to use that version, because for once there are some real performance improvement. Okay, so After Effects 2020. So I'm going to import our files, and yes, they are already. And you can see we have the Cryptomatte, as I told you, which is a separate EXR file. And I have here all my stuff. So you see 2 minutes of rendering on average. That's pretty fast. Even 1 minute, sometimes maybe 1 minute and 30 seconds. So I'm going to take any one of them, and that's very important. You need to use create composition here on import option. Okay, it won't work otherwise. So create composition. If I import now, I have a dialog box. I need to import as a composition, and I will use the pre-compose layer and contact sheet. Open the XR sequence. Okay. Click OK, and it's going to create all the compositing, the pre-compositing. This is my original file. Those are all the composition, the pre-composition, using the very same EXR file. And this is the assemble, so the composite of everything. And this is here the contact sheet. And if I look at the contact sheet, we can see all our passes all together. The diffuse filter, the Z pass, the AO, and so on. So it's good to just take a look. And I need to do something else. I need to create. So I'm just going to to create that, to have my timeline again, and close this one. No, not this one. This one. Okay, so I need to do something else before. I need to go to the project settings. So project settings are here. You click on the 32 BPC. You will have that dialog box, and you need, that's very important, you need to set the depth to 32 bits per channel. to set the working space color to sRGB and to click here on the linearize working space. You need to have all those three like that if you want everything to work, okay? So I just click, everything else is just default. If I click OK, no change. So let's take a look at our files. We have the RGB and all the other. So the RGB is the beauty pass, the funnel rendering. You can see it looks like the funnel rendering. It's all the passes together, okay? It's just for reference. So even if you have forgotten AOV pass, you will still have the complete rendering to use. And it's also important to see if your compositing is working. So now I'm going to, so this is, yes, a UV pass I didn't talk to you about. I'm going to deactivate everything. So I will start with the simple compositing using only the diffuse lighting. I put it on the top, specular lighting on top, reflection on top, GI on top. Okay. The diffuse lighting is going to stay on normal, and all those are going to be on add mode. Activate them, and that's it. If you look closely, this is our final rendering, but this is those pieces together. And if I activate the RGB, we can see there is no difference. You can't see anything because there's no difference. That means the compositing is successful. It works, okay? It should be exactly the same. And it is exactly the same. And just to see, now if I deactivate the GI reflection, we can see they're all made of that image. Okay, so before redoing the diffuse lighting with the filter and so on, I'm going to do the first steps, how to take care of those blown highlights. So first, something interesting to see, I have the info panel. And if I hover my mouse here, we can see we are in the two value. So in 32 bits, that means that it's twice brighter than pure white. That explains why we don't have anything. So 32 bits per channel means we have information in what looks like clipped highlight. I can check that by just using this toggle here. You see, we have a lot of information here. Okay, so this one just to take a look. You don't forget to switch it off. So I want to compress the dynamic range inside. So I will use a series of adjustment layer, and this first one will be the log. And I'm going to recreate the filmic LUT I used earlier. So in After Effects, you need to use the color profile converter. And here, input profile, project working space, okay. Output, I'm going to use this one, the Rec 709V log, okay. It's going to look like that. Don't worry, now we need to apply the LUT, so apply color LUT. And I'm here in the LUT shipped with Redshift. You can see Redshift data LUT. And I'm going to use the filmic high contrast LUT I used earlier. And that's it. We have the same look as in Redshift with PostFX. The blown highlights are no longer clipped and have a contrast of the scene, which is interesting. And now what's really interesting with that is that if I use now a second adjustment layer, I'm going to call it color correction before. I'll put it before the log. And if I use here exposure control, if I'm going to increase the exposure, you see it's going to brighten everything without clipping the highlight. I can change the gamma correction and have a more interesting contrast without damaging the highlight. And everything has a filmic response, so it works. It works as it should. I have a very natural response, as if it was a camera. Okay, so that's really cool because look, just without the log, this is garbage. You can see this is grossly overblown. With the log, it just works. And if I increase again the exposure, it's just going to look like overexposed, but not all burnt. So let's go back to our one parameter. This way I can use another adjustment layer, which is color correction after. And this one I can use a simple curve and just adjust a little bit the contrast like that to have even more pleasing filmic response. Okay, so that's very interesting, but it can be even better because everything, actually, most of the blown highlight come from the specular lighting. You can see I could just, on the specular lighting, use another exposure effect and just decrease the intensity of the specular lighting. You see? I could use it on the reflection. I could use it on the GI. I could use it on the diffuse lighting. So that alone is incredible because I have a lot of control on that without clipping anything, without having a negative effect on the compositing. Okay, so now before recreating our diffuse lighting, I want now to make something very important. I want to use the depth of field. So this will be another adjustment layer. I will call DOF for depth of field, and I'll use the Frischluft depth of field. So this is this one, FL Frischluft depth of field. So this is a plugin you have to buy. It's a wonderful plugin, a bit expensive. You have alternative using Fast Bokeh Pro, which is a much cheaper plugin, almost as good, but a lot cheaper. This one is the best, Frischluft depth of field. So if I use it on my scene, it's going to ask for a depth layer. My depth layer is already there. This is the depth here. So I need to go inside my depth layer. I don't say anything because I need to use here that plugin, which is already loaded, and play with the black point and white point, and look at what happens if I change the white point. All right. This is the power of the Z depth. I have a lot of control on that. I'm just going to put the white point somewhere on the back, and the black point something like that. Okay. The Z path could be used for creating shadow. Fog. You can create a fog with the Z path. It works very well. Here I'm using it for the depth, but it's very useful because I could just duplicate this composition and create some variation. So let's go back to our assemble, the DOF, using the depth layer here. And now if I increase the radius, I will have some depth of field. And at last, I need to select the depth on the picture. So I'm going to select this dominos, and that's it. We have our depth of field. And this is dynamic. I can set the depth of field here or on the back. and it just works. That's amazing because depth of field is a very expensive thing to do in rendering, and really the thing you won't be able to change. If you are calculating real depth of field and you don't like it, you have to re-render everything. You can make it sharper again. Here, it just works by setting the point where we want our depth of field. Just have to beware if you increase too much the radius, you want to make extreme depth of field effect, you will have some artifact. You can't avoid that because there is no information behind the dominos. After Effects can't guess that information, can't create this information, so it creates that kind of artifact. If you want to have very, very shallow depth of field, you will need to calculate it in real life in the render engine, or to create multiple paths of rendering. I mean, the board without the dominos and one pass with the dominos, okay? But if you keep it simple, like something, just a few pixels like that, 5, it works very well. You won't see anything. Okay, so moving on to our motion blur, MB. So I'm using here also another plugin, which is RSMB Pro Vector. This is another paying plugin you have to add. And this one, the vector need a vector file. We have it. It's already there. It's the motion, where is it? Motion vector. And it's going to work as soon as we have motion. So here you can see the motion being added by our Motion Pro vector. So obviously it's too much. I just decrease the blur amount to 0.1 and we have our motion blur. So that's great also because it works after the rendering, so I can change it anytime I want. And if I go further here, you can see the motion blur without, with. If it's still too much, I can decrease it to 0.05. You see, it just works, easy. That's great. So with that, we have almost everything. I want to do a last thing. I love to use Red Giant Lux, which is a great plugin that can add a lot of lighting tool, lighting effect. But I need to do a little thing just before I will use the color converter again, because Lux doesn't work in linear workflow, but you can make it work. And there are other plugins that don't work in linear workflow. So you have to use this trick using the color profile converter. Output profile, this one, this time I'm going to ask for sRGB. Okay, now it looks like that. I'm going to load Lux, open it. And I'm going to use any one, classic blockbuster, why not this one? So Lux would need an entire hour to take a look at that. So I'm just going to use the presets, and we can see we have different effects applied at the same time. When to apply, and it still doesn't look right. So I'm going to add another color profile converter, and since this one is outputting sRGB, this one is going to take input sRGB. And now we have before, after. So this is Lux working its magic on the scene. And I can just decrease the effect or go back to look and change stuff as much as I want. Put it 50%. And we have our scene, which looks great. And we can change so many things we couldn't if the rendering was just one pass. I still didn't show you two things, so I hope I will have the time using the diffuse filter. But before, I want to show you the Cryptomatte. So the Cryptomatte is really amazing because this is fine here, but we don't.
Feel
Yes.
free to go slightly over, Lionel. We usually try and keep these things to an hour, everyone, but this one is such an important part of this workflow, so bear with us if we go over for a couple of minutes.
So it's pretty fast to use. Cryptomatte is easy. So I'm going to import the Cryptomatte. Cryptomatte is a separate file, remember. Don't use create composition. So my Cryptomatte now is there. I'm going to put it on top of it. And it looks like that, nothing, because I need to use the Cryptomatte plugin. And the magic appears. We have all those colors. That means I can create mate with anything in the scene. So let's do it. I want to create a mate on this one and holding shift, this one, and this one, and this one. I could create a mate on the ground too. And I'm going to change the output to mated RGBA. And if I'm going to look here, you can see those are perfect mate. If I put the mate under everything, activate again, you can see it blends on the scene. The artifact you're seeing here are just caused by the depth field. So if I'm going back to this one way to use it would be to create a pre-composition, move all attribute inside. Now I can use just the layer effect. So I'm going to change that layer as a layer effect. And now I can use any effect I want. So I will use the hue saturation and change the color on the spot of anything I want. And you can see those are perfect mate, working all together with the depth of field. It's moving, of course, because it's calculating all the time. And you can create, you can just change inside your Cryptomatte. So let's reset, and use, for example, another one. Let's use the ground just to see the power of it. So the ground is going to change all that. Let's go back here. And now it's my ground, which is desaturated. No effect on the dominos. So here I would rather use it by just decreasing the saturation, for example, on the ground, without touching the saturation on the dominos. So that's great because we could use it for so many things. You just have to duplicate your footage, create some variation of that Cryptomatte thing, and it just works. That's really, really great. And then the last thing, because we created it, the diffuse lighting, just to see you the power behind that. If I use my diffuse filter and my diffuse lighting row, okay, they're here. I haven't used them already yet. So I'm going to pre-compose, call it diffuse total. Inside, activate both. And the diffuse lighting row is going to be on multiply there. Now, what's the point of doing that is that our color are separated from the shading. So if I just use another exposure effect on the shading, it's going to work on the shading without touching the color, the contrast of the scene. Because when you are increasing the luminosity and the contrast on anything, you're going to saturate the color. That's why very often you need to desaturate after a while. Here you don't need to use it because the color is there okay? So it's not influenced by this one. So I can just change my exposure, make it brighter or darker, and it's just going to work. And same thing here on the diffuse filter. If I just use the diffuse filter and use another hue saturation, that would be a proper way to change the saturation and maybe change the color of the wood, something more reddish or something like that. And everything is going to work together. So if I change my saturation, you can see there is no influence on the lighting because, again, those are separated. I could change it this way, this way. It's just working. Let's go back to the assemble. I'm going to switch my diffuse lighting. So this is the old diffuse lighting here, and this is the new one. Everything is too bright, so I'm going to go to the CC before and decrease my exposition. And you see everything is working beautifully. You won't be able to do that with just one simple layer. With everything here, I have total control on that. And I could go crazy and use our Cryptomatte on the diffuse total. So I have a better control of the color. So the trick I'd used earlier, it would be even nicer and neater if I used I changed the color of our dominos inside here, the diffuse filter, because it won't have any effect on the lighting, which is separated. So that's it. It's a lot of steps. It's a bit technical, but it's so powerful because you can do anything you want without ever needing to render again. So that's why I love it.
That's the trick, the flexibility. I loved how you explained that right at the beginning about giving yourself the option not to have to re-render.
Exactly.
So great. I think it was yesterday, it might have been yesterday, that you mentioned that you have a target render time that you try and keep to in
Yes.
outputting. What is that? Is it a minute per frame, roughly?
Yeah. No, it's more like 1.5 minutes and 2 minutes. It's very simple. It should be done during the night. That's it. So you have a change to make. The next day, I'm able to show the change. If it's going to last 18 hours, it's not going to be ready tomorrow. So because I'm always working alone on small time budget, small scale budget, because I like it, because I'm alone. And so I can't afford to have my computer blocked for some times because I have a low budget. I can't afford a render farm either. So I do everything at home, and with this trick, I can change a lot of stuff without needing to re-render again.
Yes, that's very wise. That's a really great discipline to get into, especially when you need the computer for doing new work the next day.
Well, in animation, you have
Mhm.
to find some tricks. Yes.
Absolutely. Talking of tricks, do you have handy, Lionel, your video with the stacking dominoes climbing up the
Yes.
wall?
What
Because I
we're going to
just wanted to give everyone a preview of tomorrow's session.
Yeah.
You thought today and yesterday were good. Check this out. This is amazing.
Well, tomorrow I'm just going to show some part of it. So how to do it. So using the same tricks as yesterday and today for the compositing, I created that because I'm too lazy to create some real dominoes. So I put them in 3D. And because we are in 3D, why not go on the wall?
So great. Can't wait
And
to
we
see that
learn
tomorrow.
how to track that, to make a tracking of this, how to create that kind of setups, how to blend everything together, because this is more graph, the spiral is more graph, this is physics again. No, this is more graph, I think, and this is physics. And how to blend together all together, and then how to composite everything in After Effects. So a lot of stuff.
A lot of stuff. Absolutely. That's going to be really good.
Thank you.
Excellent. And some very nice comments are coming from the questions area, Lionel. So I just wanted to pass that over. Thank you, everyone. Thanks, Larry. Thanks, Francesco. Thanks, Elio. So we'll, in fact, let me grab your screen. I just wanted to share that PDF again.
Yes,
So
go ahead.
make me the presenter again. I know I mentioned this at the beginning, but if you haven't signed up for tomorrow, please do so. We've got the link. We sent this out by email originally, and then we tweeted out the links, but here it is. Here's the registration sessions, and you'll get this automatically by email as well, and we'll put all those links into those little useful plugins that Lionel mentioned as he was going along. We'll put those into the email that follows up. And if you've got any other questions or you'd like more of a deeper answer for something, please let us know, training@maxon.net, and please feel free to reach out to us. We'd love to hear from you. So thanks again, Lionel. It's wonderful you showing your tips, your hard-earned and hard-won tips and techniques for making this stuff look amazing.
Thank you.
So great. And thank you everyone for attending. We love that you come along to these things, and it just encourages us to make more of them. So please let us know if you've got any recommendations too. Thanks, Scott, for the recommendation to get some more Cinema t-shirts, Cinema 4D t-shirts printed. So we need to do that, absolutely. So that we're on it. And thank you, Darren, for answering all the questions as we're going along again. We really appreciate that too. Thank you. So great. Thanks for bearing with us. We went slightly over, but I think you think it's worth it. I know sometimes people have got meetings to go to at the top of the hour, so we try and keep it within an hour, but sometimes there's such good material that we have to include it. So thank you. Great. So hopefully we'll see you tomorrow on the next one, and take it easy and stay healthy. All right. Thanks very much. Bye.